ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
Actually, you're just watching Diz Fairs. But that set a good tone, right? Because this episode unravels everything that went into making the original Tower of Terror at Hollywood Studios. An astounding amount of detail and dedication went into making the Tower of Terror, even by Disney's highest standards. So I'm gonna drop right into it and start with the big reveal that the initial concept was not for it to be a tower at all, but rather Castle Young Frankenstein.
There, castle.
Why are you talking that way?
I thought you wanted to.
No, I don't want to.
Suit yourself. I'm easy.
Along with its own quaint Bavarian village. The mere notion of Mel Brooks material in a Disney park still makes my eyes dilate in excitement. But the concept devolved into a Mel Brooks Hollywood horror hotel theme, and Mel left the table fairly soon thereafter. There were some talks of a Stephen King theme, and then Vincent Price, likely because of Price's work on the Phantom Manor in Paris around the time. The time being around the late 80s, early 90s, by the way. But these ideas also fell to the wayside.
I leave you now, but I'll be waiting for you on the other side.
However, the concept of a Hollywood Tower hotel to be an actual resort fans could stay at, as well as be an attraction, didn't vanish so easily. Seeing as how they were expanding Hollywood Studios, at the time it was called MGM, Disney also wanted to add another resort or two, but the logistics just never panned out. A creepy themed resort, however glitzy and glamorous, has just never been Disney's style. Then there was the screaming from the elevator drops echoing down the hallways to consider. Not to mention the maintenance involved in running a high-end attraction and hotel under the same roof. I also read that the endeavor was just unsettlingly expensive. Other than a sinkhole situation causing a shift to the actual location of the tower, construction didn't run into any problems, completing in 2.5 years and debuting along with Sunset Boulevard on no doubt a hot July day in 1994.
It's a million degrees out here.
An enormous amount of painstaking attention went into the interior and exterior. Every prop, every color, everything you see was carefully thought out, researched, and no doubt debated. And some of the inspirations are pretty interesting. Now, I don't exactly see it myself, but in doing research for this project, I found a lot of sites stating that the Tower of Terror's exterior was partially inspired by Griffith Park and Elysian Park. And if I'm pronouncing Elysian wrong, please leave a comment. I went through like 7 videos and it seems people say it differently all over. If you're not from that area, both of these parks are in California. Now, I've never been to either park, but I went through a lot of images and videos of these places and I just don't see the connections to the Tower of Terror. They're both beautiful, especially Elysian in my opinion, but I just don't see it.
You know, this is like that Twilight Zone where the guy wakes up and he's the same and everybody else is different.
Which one?
They were all like that.
And you know, I get trying to tie Griffith Park to the Tower of Terror, seeing as how it was where Walt first got the idea to develop Disneyland. But the place has so much history and is just so expansive that I again can't say where the inspirational areas for the Tower of Terror were drawn. But after a lot of time observing Griffith Park, I do get the general sense, the air, if you will, of Griffith Park's influence. Maybe you just have to have been there to really get it, but I just can't nail it down to any single location.
When the sun hits that ridge just right, these hills sing.
And I know a lot of people already know this, but there are some who don't, that because the Tower of Terror is so tall, it could be seen from Epcot's Morocco Pavilion, and was therefore purposely designed, accented, and painted to fit in with Morocco's motif when viewed from a distance. Which is an unprecedented level of dedication to decor that seems to have diminished a couple of notches over the recent decades. The Tower of Terror and its 27,000 roof tiles, if you're into those kinds of fun facts, which I sometimes am, was the tallest Disney attraction for all of about 12 years, until Imagineers made Expedition Everest a half-foot taller. I don't think this has anything to do with some petty Hollywood versus Animal Kingdom rivalry, but rather that in the state of Florida, anything over 200 feet has to legally have a blinking red light at the top. Which makes zero sense because all of Walt Disney World is listed as a national defense airspace, effectively making it a no-fly zone, so to speak. One mistake was made to the exterior I should mention. The Hollywood Tower Hotel sign was intended to be higher, above the huge scorch mark, like the one in California was.
Oh, there's a big surprise! That's an incredible... I think I'm gonna have a heart attack and die from that surprise!
If you're not familiar with them, it's hard to tell if these stone structures are part of the Tower of Terror or an ending point for Sunset Drive. I later learned that there's a plaque marking it as Sunset Hills Estates, the very estates the Tower of Terror resides. So even though they don't look like they go together, this is all part of the tower's theming. These gates are in fact replicas of the very real stone gates of Hollywood, originally constructed with the intention of having armed guards sentry off Hollywoodland from the greater Los Angeles area. However, at Disney's Hollywood Studios, they're implemented as an elaborate use of decor and bathrooms. The Tower of Terror's queue has a couple of neat things. There's a sundial that actually used to give the wait time to the attraction. Now, it perpetually reads as 5 minutes from the point of the sundial. And there's a keep out sign that states it was posted by management on Halloween 1939, the day of the infamous lightning strike.
You know, because thunder always comes after lightning. Kapow!
And if you've ever looked at this sign and wondered what a natatorium is, like myself, it derives from Latin, meaning that there's a swimming pool in that direction.
Hey! Can you tell me where the pool is?
The songs in the outdoor queue area are Inside by Fats Waller and Mood Indigo by Duke Ellington, which you've been listening to since I started talking about queues. Now, the influences for the interior of the Tower of Terror are far more recognizable than the exterior. When I first heard that the Los Angeles Biltmore was an inspiration, I was a bit dubious. I mean, the building looks absolutely nothing like the Tower of Terror. But when I saw the interior, I was all... because it does look just like the Tower of Terror in many respects. I mean, the color, the lighting, the ceiling, this centerpiece thing, the similarities just resonate, and yet the Hollywood Tower Hotel reserves its own unworldly sense of style. The Mission Inn at Riverside, California is also said to have been used to help design the Tower of Terror, and there are similarities here and there. But seeing as how the Mission Inn had so many different architects and was galvanized from so many different periods, styles, and influences that, again, it's tricky to really identify where Imagineers drew their inspiration. I don't doubt it was used though. The place is phenomenal. The antiques and furniture in the Hollywood Tower's lobby were actually purchased in auction houses throughout Los Angeles. Some of the sculptures, like this owl here, were done by Auguste Moreau, a 19th century French sculptor who came from a whole family of famous sculptors. But the level of mindfulness doesn't end there. Disney Imagineers actually hired 2 professional mahjong players and then stopped them mid-game to create this added little piece of extra ambiance. On the concierge desk is a copy of Photoplay magazine, open to a feature of 4 pages of hilarious caricatures by Walt Disney, which is actually real. It was in the January issue of 1939. And behind the concierge desk is a poster advertising Anthony Fremont's Orchestra, which is an overly shrouded reference from the It's a Good Life episode.
No comment here. No comment at all. We only wanted to introduce you to one of our very special citizens, little Anthony Fremont, age 6.
After your wait in the queue, you are brought to one of 2 libraries. One of them is called Echo, and I have no idea what the name of the other one is, but no matter. In between them is a directory with a bunch of different letters missing. If you were to write down these missing letters, rearrange them in a totally different order, flip a W into an M, bing bang boom, you will eventually unearth the message, Evil Tower, you are doomed. Which is pretty spooky, right? Especially if you went into all of that work. In both libraries, you get to see the same neat Twilight Zone introduction performed by the Rod Serling, who passed away back in the 70s.
Wow! A personal invitation from Rod Serling himself. What more can you ask for?
I've watched and listened to tons of Rod Serling speeches. His views and advice on storytelling are still incredibly relevant and inspirational. I must have listened to dozens of hours of him speaking over the years, and I still can't tell that it's never not Rod speaking in the introduction. And if it softens the blow to hear that all of that dialogue isn't Rod Serling, his widowed wife was the one who chose Mark Silverman to replicate the voice of her husband. But anyway, back to the libraries. They are very similar and both have a bunch of awesome props from the show, such as a pair of broken glasses from Time Enough at Last, my personal favorite episode.
That's not fair. That's not fair at all. There was time now.
The fortune-telling machine from Nick of Time, a stopwatch from A Kind of Stopwatch, the trumpet from Passage for Trumpet, and a small metal spaceman from The Invaders. In one of the libraries, there's a music sheet for the song What? No Mickey Mouse? Performed by Ben Burney and his Hotel Roosevelt Orchestra, which is playing right now. Both libraries also have a copy of To Serve Man, from the episode To Serve Man.
Mr. Chambers, don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, it's a cookbook.
The tower's extensive queue ends in the dank boiler room. If you get a chance, check out the inspection certificate on the wall here. You'll see that it's signed by a one Mr. Cadwallader, an individual who was also known as the Devil in the episode Escape Clause. The certificate is also numbered 10259, a reference to October 2nd, 1959, the day that Twilight Zone first hit television screens across the nation. Every time you ride, there is in fact a 130-foot drop, essentially a 13-story drop, which, by the way, when I found out, made all of the number 13 references on the ride and merchandise over the years finally makes sense to me. I don't know why the significance of the number 13 isn't more heavily advertised. The 13 over the doors before you get into your car. The 13 Diamond Hotel rating in the lobby. The AAA Diamond Awards for excellence really only goes to 5. I thought they were just using the number to be creepy. I didn't know there was an actual significance to the attraction itself. Oh, and if you see that there's a 13-minute wait, it really means that there's no wait time. This also goes for the Haunted Mansion, by the way. So according to the storyline, in case you don't recall or have never heard it, the Hollywood Tower Hotel was struck by lightning on Halloween 1939. The 5 guests who happened to be riding the elevator during the strike died, disappeared, landed in the 5th dimension. It's not precisely laid out. However, their souls still dwell within the hotel. That's the gist. And I'm not going to drag the 1997 made-for-TV film into this, though I'll mention that there's talk of a new Tower of Terror film in the works, supposedly going to be directed by Taika Waititi, whom, if you didn't already know, is the voice of IG-11 in The Mandalorian.
This is true.
What's actually pretty neat is that there's all kinds of footage of lightning striking the Tower of Terror, like in reality. Real lightning striking the lightning rods. The reason for the reoccurrence isn't at all spooky, though. The attraction is the tallest structure at Hollywood Studios, and, lightning tends to strike the highest points. And you're in the lightning capital of the world.
I need more thunderbolts!
The conveyance cars in the Tower of Terror are flat out genius. When the door opens in the boiler room, you get yourself seated, and when the elevator rises, you likely think the ride has already begun. But it kinda hasn't. You're just riding in a car that's locked in place inside of an old regular elevator. The car system hasn't even begun yet. The first stop on the elevator shows the souls beckoning, as their kind tends to do to the living. But you may wonder how the illusion is done. It's called the Pepper's Ghost, after John Henry Pepper, who figured out way back in 1862 that if you use a piece of glass placed at a 45-degree angle, you can project an incorporeal image for an observer, demonstrated as the red square shape here. So if you ever wondered why the Tower of Terror building is so wide and why the heck the back is so long, it's because the attraction utilizes 4 of these so-called hallways, and they each require an adjoining side room to properly project the illusion. There's more to it, but you get the gist, I'm sure. After this scene, you're brought up to the 5th floor, also just so happening to be the 5th dimension. As the elevator opens, your car moves for the first time, officially making this attraction a ride, unless you like elevators enough to call them rides. The cars operate on their own batteries, equipped with sensors that pick up radio signals from wire guides set along the floor, which for the time was pretty awesome. These cars are sort of the predecessors to Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, Remy's Ratatouille Adventure, and Rise of the Resistance. So your awesome, technologically advanced car traverses you across the entire 5th dimension before settling into the next elevator.
Next!
It's a common misnomer that the Tower of Terror is a free-fall ride. It's not. You're never free-falling. You are, in fact, actually being pulled down by the cable attached to the bottom of the elevator by a computer and pulled back up over and over again. Which may be fun to contemplate that you're essentially in the position of a salt shaker, but instead of a hand shaking you up and down, it's a machine. That's not a weird analogy, is it? But you get the point. Disney worked with the Otis Elevator Company, a real elevator company since 1853, started up by Elijah Graves Otis, the inventor of the elevator. So it's a trustworthy elevator system. The Eaton Kenway Power Management Company was also brought in to help design and implement the attraction's horizontal moving system. Seeing as how Otis doesn't make rides, it's obvious why Eaton Kenway was brought in. As I mentioned earlier, there are 2 drop shafts and 4 elevators at the beginning to lift vehicles up to the 5th dimension. The drop elevators themselves are nothing particularly different than most besides their size and scope. They're called traction elevators, which means it uses these big 2,000 horsepower induction motors at the top of each shaft to move the elevator up and down at about the rate of 15 times faster than a typical elevator. The motors are each connected to 2 cable drums, and each drum has a solenoid brake at each end of every drum. So there's a total of 4 solenoid brakes for each motor or shaft, or however you want to look at it. Solenoid brakes are a fancy way of saying electric brakes. If the motor loses power, the brakes immediately engage. If this wasn't enough, there is also a mechanical speed governing system. Yet another fancy way of saying emergency friction brakes along the edges of the elevator that will clamp down along the side rails. Each elevator is also equipped with 2 cables, each of which is easily capable of holding the weight of the whole car with passengers. So your safety is doubled up there as well, and you have all the electrical brakes above you and the friction side brakes. Sounds pretty safe, right? But there's also counterweights along the sides of the elevator that each weigh about as much as an empty car, and they're connected to a compensation pulley at the bottom, which is how the car is actually pulled down rather than just being a free-fall ride. And these also have friction brakes in case of an emergency. So just hypothetically, let's say the solenoid brakes fail. Both cables snap for some reason, and let's say half of all the friction brakes were to just not work for some reason. Well, then the elevator would create compressed air beneath itself, much like the pneumatic elevators that are in some homes that don't even use cables. And there are shock absorbers at the bottom, which would likely create an abrupt, but safe enough, stop. So really, it's just a statistically staggering unlikelihood for all of these things to go wrong, but even if they did, you'd still have a safe, albeit bump, of a landing. That's why it's called a redundant safety system. And this final fail-safe system has never needed to be deployed at the Tower of Terror.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Okay, so the drops are over, you're back at the bottom, the car moves and turns along more wire guides so you can get out. While this is happening, there's an inductive charging system under the car that is actually charging it for its next voyage. That's why the creepy cast members are never rushing you along to get moving. It's the only time the car is stationary. Therefore, it's the only time for it to charge up. From when the tower opened in 1994 to 1996, there was just a single big, terrifying drop. This then shifted to 2 big drops, then later on to 3. In 2003, they just decided to have a computer randomize the drop sequences up and down, so you never quite get the same exact experience. However, somewhere in those dips and pulls, you will have one big drop that goes the whole way from top to bottom, depending on which shaft you're in or the drop profile as it's called. You have a chance of seeing a blue ghost, lightning, or the smashing window again. The top speed possible is 39 miles per hour, which doesn't mean much because you're going up and down, and nobody is really accustomed to their body moving that quickly at an up and down angle. But hey, now you know, 39 miles per hour. That's like 14 miles per hour faster than Space Mountain. Hey, and you're in the dark on that one too. Before you get out of your car, by the way, take a look around to spot Caesar. Caesar is a dummy from the Caesar and Me episode. The creepiness of Caesar was likely taken from a 40s film called Dead of Night, but the uneasiness of such puppets has lasted for decades.
Hello? Is somebody there? Mr. Marbles?
There's also the slot machine from the Fever episode in this cluttered unloading area. If you happen to be waiting for someone to get off the attraction, there are these really neat chalk marks on the wall. This supposedly leads you to the 4th dimension, and are from the Little Girl Lost episode. As you exit the Tower of Terror, you inevitably pass the Sunset Room, along with its quite antiquated menu. This was all part of the fun story about the Hollywood Tower Hotel once being a happening sort of place in 1939. It was never really intended to serve food or drinks, which is unfortunate, because it would have been a really perfect place for a nice reservation sit-down restaurant. There isn't one anywhere down all of Sunset Boulevard. Some Imagineers should do something about that. I've decided to try to lay off the whole Hidden Mickey thing, but there are 2 worth mentioning. Actually, I don't know if you really want to call this one a Hidden Mickey, but the little girl who disappears while you're on the elevator is holding a 1930s Mickey Mouse doll, which is a nice touch. And this little girl was Lindsay Ridgway, who subsequently played the 2nd iteration of the little sister Morgan in Boy Meets World, which, even if you didn't love the show, how could anyone hate Mr. Feeney? And there are, in fact, 2 other Tower of Terrors, one in Paris and the other in Tokyo. Both have their differences from the original here at Hollywood Studios, but it is roundly agreed that the one in Hollywood Studios Disney World is the best. There was once another version at Disneyland California Adventure, but that one also didn't quite measure up to the original, so they turned that one into the Guardians of the Galaxy attraction. Now, I can't end this episode without mentioning the jar of pickled sausages glued down behind the photo pickup. The jar was apparently passed between Imagineers working on the tower site during construction, where they proceeded to place it in certain places to prank one another. I don't exactly understand it, but it ended up accidentally getting glued down as a prop. So now it's a permanent fixture. So that's it. That's the episode. If there's anything neat about the Tower of Terror you know about that I left out, please leave it in a comment. Or if you just want to share an awesome story. I really like picking up new Disney information, which is probably an obvious statement. That's why I make these episodes, right? And if you're interested in this sort of thing, check out Mort & Co. Candles on Etsy. They have this amazing Terror Tower candle, as well as a bunch of other Disney-themed candles that are just really great. So yeah, the Tower of Terror has become a staple to Hollywood Studios, and I think it's great that Hollywood has its own thing with a tower aside from the traditional mountains other parks have. I think it would have made more sense to build a Guardians Tower at Hollywood, preferably on the other side of the park from the Tower of Terror, rather than at Epcot. But then again, I've never made a multi-million-dollar decision, so what do I know? It would be cool to have a second tower attraction at Hollywood though, something like Wreck-It Ralph.
I'm gonna wreck it!
Or Fortress Vader, who knows, maybe one day, the parks are always changing. In the meantime, we all have this awesome tower and it doesn't look like it's going anywhere. It does everything an attraction should. It takes us on a fun journey and captivates the imagination, all while immersing us in a bygone age. It's one of the best.
This bear's out.